I'm Ben Sawyer, and this is The Road to Now. Our guest today is Joe Lockhart. Joe was the press secretary for Bill Clinton, took over right during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, so hard first days at work. But his career has spanned decades. He was working for the Mondale campaign in '84, worked for John Kerry, and has since then done all kinds of amazing things. You can check out the link in the bio. Too many to mention, or at least some that if we mention, you're going to be like, why didn't we ask him about that? Well, we barely got into it. We're going to have Joe back on because this conversation was great. We just wanted to recap where we are with politics, how, again, we thought we got here, what's happening currently. Those are all things that are hard to see. And with somebody like Joe's instincts and experience, it's pretty interesting to hear his take on that, as well as his stories about working for Clinton, which were fantastic. Shout out again to Doug High. I mean, it's like the man's name is on the show every week, but apparently Doug brought Joe to the live show in D.C., and Joe saw us there, and we all got to be friends. So pretty cool story that led to a pretty cool conclusion. Speaking of which, it's the conclusion of my year off from teaching. I'm going back to teaching the morning this airs as you listen to this. If you listen to it on Monday, August 25th, I'm back in the classroom. I had to miss last year because of stupid cancer. I'm fine now, except for the fact that I miss teaching. And man, MTSU, what is up? I am going to be so happy to be back in my classes tomorrow. I love history. Thank you guys for listening to this show. This last year off has been a challenge, and knowing that people were out there listening, even though I didn't have an audience of students in front of me, it felt great. Patrons, especially, thank you to you. You kept the show going. You keep the show going. If you want to support our show, patreon.com/theroadtonow. And speaking of back at it, me and Bob are back at it with intensity. We've already got 2 episodes in the can. We're recording another one tomorrow. I think we have like 5 episodes lined up in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and they're all going to be great. So look forward to sharing all that with you guys, and to a great, great end of the summer, end of 2025, and on to the future. Take care.
I'm Bob Crawford.
I'm Ben Sawyer.
And this is The Road to Now.
Yes, it is. Back at it.
Well, today we have a friend who comes to us via a very good friend of ours. Our friend Doug High connected us to Joe Lockhart, former White House press secretary, Joe Lockhart. Joe, it's always great when a friend introduces you to a new friend. So welcome to The Road to Now.
Thank you. And I really appreciate Doug's help because I got to see your show and it was amazing. And anyone who's listening to this who hasn't, do it.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. We really appreciate that. Okay, so this poll came out a few weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, and it said that the Democratic Party's favorability rating is about 30 to 33%, the lowest it's been since 1990. Let's go back to 1990 for a minute.
Yeah.
Democrats lost in '84 to Walter Mondale. You worked for candidate Mondale.
I certainly did. I worked for a lot of guys who wanted to be president and were not.
Democrats lost in '88 for Governor Dukakis, and you worked for Governor Dukakis.
I did. Are we going to go through all of these?
Well,
we can just...
Well, I just feel like it's like, okay, Democrats' favorability ratings historically low right now. It was historically low then. We forget about what happened in 1992, another gentleman you worked for. So give us the perspective, like you've been in the wilderness before, right? The party's in the wilderness. You were there. What was it like to be in the wilderness then, and how did the party get out of it then?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a lot of fun. I'll tell you that. There was a lot of hard work that went for nothing in the 80s, and a lot of good people who would have served the country well denied that privilege. There's a lot of similarities between then and now. The Democratic Party is going to remain unpopular until the Democratic Party solves its fundamental problem, which is, where are you going to sit? Half the party believes that the party isn't progressive enough. Half the party believes the party is too progressive. Half the party believes that some of these social issues are worth fighting for. The other half of the party thinks they're not, fights willing to die for. It's just not a hill. And the reason it's similar is Democratic Party was in roughly the same place in 1988, 1990. And what Bill Clinton was able to do was bring those two groups together. There were progressives back then. It really was kind of special interest driving a lot of the party, the teachers unions, the auto workers unions. And there was a lot of people that felt left out. And what Clinton was able to do is just bring all of these factions together. Part of it was the party was tired of losing. And Clinton was such a charismatic figure that people decided, you know what, winning is really important. Let's put our differences aside. And it's certainly my hope that that can happen again. I was talking to some former Clinton people the other day, and there's a real nostalgia now for Bill Clinton after some time of when he wasn't so popular. And I don't know that we have a figure that has emerged yet to do that. But I will say this about politics. Politics is not very often about what you're for. Politics is about what you're against. I think what Trump has done to the Republican Party gives the Democrats a rallying cry to come together. So I think that their prospects are not as bad as this 30%, because Trump still leads the party. He will not be on the ticket in I guess a year and a few months now. In the midterms. The hard part will be if the Democrats ever take control governing, because that split is still there and it's real. But sometimes when you have power, you're able to compromise, sort of divergent principles. And again, Clinton was able to do that. Who's going to do that for the Democrats now? I just don't know.
Yeah, that to me is a stark difference between what's going on now with the party and the 80s. As much as we think of the 80s as being this era of Reagan, the Democrats maintained control of the House throughout the 1980s. And I wonder, do you think it's more of a challenge if you're in power, or do you think kind of being pushed aside right now, as the Democrats are in all the major branches of the federal government, do you think that gives them more of an opportunity, or is that more of a obstacle to overcome?
Sure. There is a big difference between the 80s and now when it comes to congressional elections. There's the way maps are drawn are roughly the same. It's getting a little bit worse. It's getting a lot worse in places like Texas, where they're having, an ongoing fight. But there was this tradition back then of reelecting 90 to 95% of incumbents, because people hated the body, but they loved their member. That's changed. There's a lot of turnover now. It's a lot more ideological. The moderates in Congress are gone. It is just extremes. Given that, it's a lot easier for the House and the Senate to turn over. They turn over now, if not every 4 years, every 6 years in the House. If you look at the history of the last couple of decades, it used to take decades for it to turn over. So I think it's easier for Democrats. I think the prospects for taking the House are good, despite the low polling for the party as a whole. Senate is challenging, but not impossible. And that will change the dynamic. I do think there is a appetite out there for the return of checks and balances. This idea that there should be some constraint on what the president's doing, because there's, he has done such extreme things that even people who support him have a problem with some of the stuff. Even Joe Rogan right now is taking him to task over things that he thinks are too extreme. So I think their party has their own issues. And given all of that, I think the prospects for the Democrats are a lot better than they seem right now.
Let's talk about your career. Take us back to 1984 and working with Walter Mondale on that campaign. Because Reagan was this transformational figure. And so running a campaign, it's almost like running a campaign against Trump in some ways, because it's not, Reagan was at the front of a movement. So talk about, trying to mount a campaign against something like that.
Yeah, I think Reagan, there's a little bit of revisionist history on Reagan, because as many will remember, in 1982, the Republicans got slaughtered. They lost something like 60 seats in the House. Tip O'Neill made Social Security the issue, the only issue. And it really killed Republicans because that was the point where they were really starting to talk about either privatizing Social Security or getting rid of it. But what happened was the economy rebounded. And in 1984, it was a very difficult circumstance for Democrats. It would have taken, I don't know who could have beaten Reagan in 84. The transformational part of it is very different, though. What Reagan did was he brought a bunch of traditional Democrats to the Republican Party that stayed there for quite a while. I think, and it wasn't necessarily ideological or purely ideological. It was this idea that, that things weren't going well and the Democrats were no longer serving. There's a good bit of that now. I think what Trump did is he's kind of created a new movement. It's more of a cult than a political party. And he's brought out a bunch of people who normally don't vote at all. And if you had the traditional model of voters that had existed before Trump, he would have lost in 2024. So it's these new voters that have, again, are non-traditional. It's one of my favorite phrases in the world is they're called low information voters, which is a nice way of saying not very smart, and certainly not very smart about what he's doing and what's in the news. So there are some differences. And while I think Reagan transformed the Republican Party in a way that held until about 2010, when you had the Freedom Caucus, even Newt Gingrich started in mid 90s. I'm not sure Trump, once he's gone as a cult-like figure, is going to have the same impact Reagan did on Republicans. But getting to your question, it was almost impossible to beat Reagan in 1984, given his ability to campaign, given where the country was, and I love Walter Mondale more than anyone really that I've ever worked for, but given his limitations as a candidate, it's not a shock that we won one state.
I want to interrogate this term because it's come up a lot recently. The idea that it's that Trump is what's happening with Trump is a cult. And I wonder what you mean by that when you say it, because I've heard people say it in different ways. I think that the term has a pejorative sense, but I also am like in a situation where when I try to explain what's going on, it's very hard to explain a reasonable path that follows all of the steps he takes throughout it without some type of overarching just faith. So I wonder what you mean by that and how that can be helpful as we look at how to move beyond our current moment.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. One is there's this faith in him, which is cult-like. No matter what he does, it's right. And even if he says on, Monday the sun came up in the east, if he says on Tuesday it comes out in the west, 45% of the country are going to believe it because Trump said it. But that alone doesn't do enough. What he does, in addition to that, is he's a vengeful, punishing politician. That if you are not with him 100%, he will punish you and try to move you out of office. And he's been very successful in castrating the Republican Party. Even people who never agree with him, who privately criticize him, will not cross him because they know that they'll lose their seat. And it's a given. And again, this is different than when I started this 40 years ago. The single driving force among elected officials right now is to get reelected. In 1970s, 60s, a lot of it was doing what they believed in. And this is far more prevalent in the Republican Party, but it does exist among Democrats also.
Looking back on 84, it was Geraldine Ferraro was selected as the vice presidential campaign, which was a very forward-looking pick. Did you guys have a sense that it was something that could spark excitement amongst the base, or was it like, this person is the best choice at this time for this position?
Well, it's funny. Let me diverge for a second. There's just one of my funny political stories. It was a very closely held secret in the campaign, and about 5 people knew that the pick had been made, and we were up all night the night before. And I remember going into the staff room, and I was not one of the 5 in the staff room, and seeing a fax come in with a speech announcing Dianne Feinstein as the the candidate as the vice president. And someone who worked for me, who was very close to the family, was one of the five. And all she said to me was, "It's a woman." So for 5 hours, I thought it was Diane. And somebody at like 3 o'clock in the morning from the Today Show said, we this is historic. It's a woman. I said, I know. I'm not going to confirm that, but I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. And she said, Jerry Ferraro, a woman from Queens. And I was like, what? And then I went back into the staff room. There were 7 speeches written on the floor of, for everyone who was a candidate. And I thought I could have looked pretty stupid there. And many times I have, but that was one time I avoided it. It was a kind of a, Hail Mary. She had certain qualities. She was certainly qualified, I think, unlike someone like Sarah Palin. But we needed to shake things up, and we thought that maybe we could make this into more of a movement and women of both parties would combine. It didn't happen. And I think one of the things we found out, particularly with Hillary Clinton, is conservative women don't want a woman as president. Many moderate women don't want a woman as president. The country, for whatever reason, is just not ready for them holding the highest office. You can say Kamala Harris as vice president is progress, sure, but until a woman gets elected president, I don't think we'll break that barrier.
Do you think the first woman president will be a Republican?
That's a theory, and I think it in some ways it'd be easier for a woman that's a Republican. I think it's pretty tough to see a woman getting the nomination in the Republican Party, but it is certainly possible, and because it hasn't been working for Democrats.
Well, and I'll button up this line of questioning, unless Ben has something, of course. But looking to 2028, Harris decided not to run for governor of California. Amy Klobuchar is out there. She could be a great candidate. There are no shortage of great women candidates for the Democratic Party. AOC is often mentioned in the conversation. I'm just going to give you my opinion, is that there's no way in heck the Democrats nominate a woman in 2028, not because of the fact that it is a woman, but just by the fact of 2016 and 2024.
Yeah, listen, I don't think the Democratic Party does things in a way that's logical. I think the Democratic Party does things based on how we feel. And it's just even saying the Democratic Party is a misnomer. It's just a lot of different ideas and people. Here's what I say. I think it's wide open, 2028. And so to rule out a woman at this point, I wouldn't rule one out, but I still think it's somebody we haven't heard a lot from. So, Kamala obviously has a group of supporters, Amy Klobuchar, Gretchen Whitmer. There are people that have support and are very smart. But I think the traditional candidates are going to have some trouble. I think if Democrats are smart, they will not look for gender. They'll look for age. Because I think with the public, certainly progressive. I have a 31-year-old daughter, and she has she has kind of a dividing line, which is if you're like a white guy in their 70s, she doesn't even consider it. It doesn't matter. It could be, someone magical who had all the right ideas. It just doesn't work for her. And I think there's a lot of people in that generation that are like, it's time for someone new. So, a lot of it just depends on, who takes advantage of the moment. I mean, right now, Gavin Newsom is taking advantage of the moment. But taking advantage of the moment in 2025, is important, but it's much more important 2 years from now. So I do think it's wide open. So, if it is wide open, a woman could get nominated. Again, Democrats don't think logically. I mean, I think Republicans are much more thoughtful about how you win elections. Democrats are much more thoughtful of how winning the election to get things done, and it's the old issue. Republicans want to win. The Democrats win the campaign. Democrats want to win the issues. And there's some truth to that. But being in the wilderness changes things. And, Bill Clinton, I don't think would have gotten the nomination as a Southern Democrat if we hadn't spent 12 years being out of power. So I think we'll look this time and be much more thoughtful about let's nominate someone who can win. And it's certainly my hope. It could be a pipe dream, but it is my hope. And I hope it's somebody much younger than me.
Yeah, I mean, just on a basic level, I appreciate, Joe. You're an insider, and you seem to share my my assessment, which is never underestimate the Democratic Party's capacity to learn nothing from previous elections. It kills me. I mean, it's just simply if you were to take Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and put them side by side, and then take Al Gore and Hillary Clinton and put them side by side, you would notice. I mean, you could have a barometer that just the charisma between those characters is those two sides is so different. When you talk about Clinton coming into office, I mean, that was an interesting election, right? Where you have, you have the third party candidate there, right? Ross Perot. But in the conversation that we recorded yesterday, but it's going to air after this one, we talked a lot about globalization and this passing of the torch, where really you see NAFTA being an issue that was laid out by the Bush administration under these principles that had been really held up by the Republican Party for a while. And then Clinton takes that on. And now we're living in a backlash to globalization. And the Democrats are really holding the bag with that. And I wonder if you thought, now that we're in this moment, what do you think the best strategy would be in terms of addressing the issue? Because, David Lynch, who we're going to talk to in the next episode, his argument is that the Democrats embraced globalization, but ultimately left people kind of to the whims of the world without any support. Is there a way they could address that and perhaps turn things around?
Yeah, at the risk of saying it's not our fault, let me say this. President Clinton had this idea that you had to look to the future, and the future was, it's pejorative now, globalization. It's sort of opening up the trading system, which would be good for everyone. And if you look at the Clinton administration, all sectors of society, from a socioeconomic point of view, benefited. There was also a very robust package of retraining and things that allowed people that were going to be left out, allowed them to be brought into the benefits of globalization. Unfortunately, we got killed in 1994 in the midterm elections because of things like guns. Had nothing to do with globalization. People hadn't been displaced yet, and all of that stuff went to the side, and none of it was there. So, in talking to the people, the main people who were proponents of this, opening up the world, that's what they point to. What Democrats haven't done now and need to do is not only promote some of these ideas that are traditional Democrats, that people need to be retrained, need to be prepared for this new world. We haven't even brought in artificial intelligence yet, and I don't think anybody has a plan for that, to Democrat or Republican, which makes this even more complicated. But they need to articulate the benefits of globalization. I mean, what I say to people when they argue that tariffs are the best thing and globalization is, I say, how often do you go to Walmart? How do you like those low prices? Well, there wasn't a Walmart, before everything opened up. And if you want to pay higher prices for everything you buy, then Trump's your guy. So Democrats, I think, have to balance this conversation with there have been great benefits to this, but also problems. The second piece, which is very different, is we didn't have this income inequality in the 90s. We didn't have this billionaire class. You had very rich people, but since 2000, I know I'm going to make these numbers up, but I think I'm right. Since 2000, most of the country has stayed steady as far as their economic situation, or even gone down, while the top 0.1% is off the charts. And that's a recipe for both economic and social unrest. And Trump has, Trump has done one of the really hard to explain things, which is promote the oligarchy, but convince the people who are left out that he's for them. And the sleight of hand that I guess I have to give them credit for. Democrats, I think, have to take on this idea that everyone's falling behind, and everyone's falling behind because Republicans have led us astray and sort of are only working for the very wealthy. They haven't been able to do that yet. And if you look at the campaigns for the midterms, Democrats are not talking about democracy. They're not talking about Trump being out of control and Trump being corrupt and Trump doing this. They're talking about making your economic situation better. Is that going to work? I don't know. It's certainly what the polls are telling them works, because we still live in particularly the Democrats, in this consultant class where, these people who sit in Washington and are poring over polls really push what the party is doing. I'm not sure that's the right thing, but that's where we are.
Well, according to what you said earlier, which is you don't win campaigns by being for something, you win by being against something. It sounds to me like by that strategy, being for improved economic status without setting up a straw man to attack may be not effective.
Well, I think you are setting up the straw man as the one has been the steward of this terrible situation for many Americans. So it's not just here's what we're for. There's going to be a lot of. I think what's interesting is among the most inside progressive Democrats, the things that really worry them are this attack on democracy, this corruption at the highest level, the destroying of norms and institutions. But get outside Washington, 2024 tells us they don't care that much about it. They care about what's going on in their lives economically, and you can argue about a lot of things as the number one issue to this. Where I think it's inflation. It's just that people were tired of their paychecks not going as far as they used to, and inflation returning will be a huge problem for Republicans.
And it's something we're going to feel here in the next probably 6 months.
It's interesting that we haven't really felt it yet, but I think we haven't felt it yet because all of this talk about tariffs and all that stuff so far has been somewhat meaningless because he keeps changing his mind. So I don't think we have felt it. If these things take hold, which they likely will, you're going to see people, going to the Walmart or, an upscale store and seeing prices for things 20, 30, 40% higher. That's going to have an impact. And they're not going to blame Democrats for that.
Let's talk about being a press secretary. You control the flow of information from the executive to the American people, to the media, really. Take us back to when you came in as Bill Clinton's press secretary, 1998, I believe it was.
Yeah, I had worked for him for a while in various roles. But in 1998, my first day at the podium was the day the House of Representatives formally opened the impeachment hearings. Even they at the same exact time, as I stood up for the first time.
So thrown into the fire.
Yeah, but I'd been handling all of the star stuff and all of the stories around Monica Lewinsky, and I purposely don't call it the Lewinsky scandal because she really didn't do anything wrong. It's a Bill Clinton scandal, and I think people understand that. And I love the man, but I'm not going to defend anything there, nor does any of the people who are close to him. I think so. It was trial by fire. It was really trying to be as open as we could on the issues, the challenges that face the president, but to keep as much of the focus as we could on all of the good things that were happening. And there were a lot of good things. I mean, people forget, and they think it's impossible that the country could run a budget surplus. Well, guess what? We did it 2 years in a row, and we're able to return billions of dollars, to the Treasury. We're able to save Social Security from going bankrupt. So all of those things are possible. So it really was a challenge to do that. And we were able to do it. I mean, and some of this was a little bit of political backlash for Republicans overreaching, But the president started before all of this in the high 50s, low 60s. By the time it was over, he was in the mid 70s as far as approval. So I think we take some solace in doing a good job there. I will anticipate maybe your next question or down the line, but I think this is the question I get all the time, which is what's different now? And it's what's different now is fundamentally, and you cannot overstate how important this is. They can say anything they want, and they create their own alternative facts because the media, traditional media, doesn't matter to them anymore. In fact, it doesn't matter because they've created their own. This is much more powerful, and they've created a media that is a cult, which no matter what they say, no matter how wrong it is, no matter how nonsensical it is. I mean, you read a Trump transcript, and you cannot follow it. It has no logic to it. It's riddled with errors. It's riddled with nonsense and bizarre comments, and it's sanitized by the right-wing media and seen as some cogent idea for where the country should go. So the traditional reason for not overstepping and not trying to destroy institutions when I was there, even up to before Trump, at Trump 2, was the media was a very powerful check. We would stop from doing things that were wrong because we were afraid of what the New York Times would say about it. They don't care. They don't need the New York Times. So they're able to put up someone who really doesn't know anything, who just takes whatever the president said that day, even if it contradicts what he said the other day, and just repeat it and then attack the media for being crazy leftists. And it works because they're able to reach their own people through their own media.
Yesterday, on Julie Mason's show on SiriusXM POTUS channel 124, where you can hear this program on weekends.
One of my favorites.
And early Monday.
Jessica Yellen, former CNN reporter, was on. She now is doing purely social media reporting on TikTok. She's trying to bring good reporting to TikTok. She told Julie that this year will be the first year more people get their news from social media than traditional sources. So we have crossed completely over. We are completely into the new realm of most people receiving their information, not from CNN, CBS, ABC, even Fox News, but from TikTok and Facebook and social media. So we are in a completely new era.
Yeah, and it's in this era, for now, Republicans have a massive advantage because they developed this, and a lot of the innovations in politics come from losing. If you lose, it means someone's done something better than you, which means you better build something better than them, or you're going to keep losing. People forget that one of the reasons Barack Obama won was he figured out how to use the nascent social media. He had hundreds of people creating content for Facebook, for Instagram, while Republicans were like, what's Facebook? What's Instagram? Now the Republicans, have taken advantage of the explosion, a lot of its podcasts, but also, social channels in a way the Democrats can't compete with. But again, everybody thinks that everything in the people say two things. One is this is the most important election in history. I don't know how every election can be that, but it's always said. And two, this is brand new. It is new, but it follows a pattern. One of the reasons that Ronald Reagan was elected was a guy by the name of Richard Viguerie perfected direct mail. All of a sudden, you could send very discreet messages through the mail to people. It was hugely successful. Right-wing radio talk shows, the development of that. There's a through line from right-wing radio talk shows to Joe Rogan and podcasts. So these things develop, and they do. The pendulum swings between the parties over who has the advantage. It is very difficult in this moment to see Democrats building something to rival what Republicans have, but I'll predict they will, because history tells us they will, and this will swing in the other direction. And you see the seeds of it a little bit now. Jessica Yellen is doing really interesting stuff. There's some really interesting stuff being done on things like Substack, and Democrats. So a lot of the best traditional journalists are going out on their own because they have no impact writing for where they are, and they've become entrepreneurs. They want to make money doing this, which is I'm all for. So it is certainly possible, and the strength of the Republican ecosystem has been their ability to stay together. That's fracturing a little bit over the Epstein files and the Epstein issue. We'll see if that takes, or if they come back together because power is so important to them, and they excuse many personal faults of this president. Many personal faults. But I am of the belief, looking at the history, at least since I've been doing this, that these things go back and forth, and the technology does drive a lot of it. And we don't know who's going to win from a political point of view, the AI or super intelligence fight, the one that, the next frontier. And the Democrats may have a leg up on that because the Republicans are fat and happy because they control the ecosystem now. So it's anybody's guess of when it swings, but my guess is it's going to at some point.
Your specialty is communications, right? I mean, you're the guy who goes out and, when you worked for Bill Clinton, you were the guy who was like, all right, here's what happened, right? You put the information into a narrative. And obviously in that, you think about the means of communication, as we were just talking about. I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong about this, I feel like there's an interesting turn that's happened maybe in the last few weeks. And the two things that made me think this is, number one, Gavin Newsom just going off and making these Trump-like posts, which I got to say, like 2 years ago, I would have thought was trite. But there's something about it now that for me at least clicks, and it's like, it's funny, and I wonder if it's going to work. And then the second one is Zelensky's recent meeting with Trump, where Trump, was like, you're going to wear a suit, and then had chastised him for not saying thank you. And Zelensky went into the not the White House, but the meeting, wearing a suit, no problem, presented a letter that was from his wife, and gave the nod to the master, thank you so much. And I feel like a year ago that would have felt like he was weak. But now what I feel like is there's this transparency to who Trump is that is almost being turned, kind of parodied. And it feels like when Zelensky did that, it didn't feel like Trump had the upper hand. It felt like Zelensky had the upper hand. He's like, I know what I got to do.
Yeah.
Like it's obvious what I got to do. So I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
There's a lot there in that question. So I'm going to try to piece out, and I apologize in advance if I talk too much. I think the start with Gavin Newsom. He's, what I give Gavin Newsom is credit for is his willingness to take chances. His original foray into this was to go on all the right-wing media. And I'm not sure that worked for him because I think the party it didn't have an impact within the right wing. And I think the Democratic Party thought it was some sort of betrayal. This is working for him. This taking Trump's style and making fun of it. And it works because people see it and they realize how ridiculous Trump is. And secondly, it's getting under Trump's skin. Easiest thing in the world to do is get under Trump's skin because he just doesn't believe, honestly, he doesn't believe that he's not telling the truth. He believes he is. And he doesn't believe that anyone has anyone to offer him that's better than what he thinks. So this is working. We'll see. It doesn't solve the problem. I think the Zelensky, and then just to finish the point, everyone who needs something from the president has figured out how they get it. I mean, Tim Cook going in with this gold-plated thing and giving it to Trump, where I think everyone at Apple was laughing at the president, but he got what he wanted. He got the carve out from the tariffs, and it was that easy. So all you have to do is tell the emperor that he has clothes, even though he doesn't. It's that simple. I think the really, really interesting thing, though, was this meeting. And it started with the Putin Trump meeting, where Trump basically gave the store away. and which he's prone to do when it comes to Putin, because for whatever reason he admires him and wants to please him. And again, I don't think he worries himself with the intricacies of foreign policy and diplomacy and how to start a war and how to end a war. It's just, this is all sort of how he looks in the process, and he wants to look like a strong man and a leader. The fact that, I don't know whether it was 5 or 6 European heads of state got on a plane and came over with Zelensky was a strong message to Trump. You're not in charge anymore. The United States is no longer the adult in the room if we stick together, and Europe, we are sticking together. So, all of a sudden, Trump's not facing Zelensky. He's facing Europe. And they took this step. It is unimaginable that on a whim, 6 leaders would get on a plane to support, Zelensky. And it completely caught Trump flat-footed. And all of a sudden, he tried to take some of the story he gave away, but showed that he doesn't, this is the problem, or the challenge of when you say you have ultimate power. When someone exposes you don't, the whole thing has the potential to start unraveling. So I think it was unprecedented to see. And I think it might have a long-lasting impact because, he's had to cave at the, because more power was put in the room than he had. And that doesn't happen very often with Trump. It doesn't happen very often with an American president. And I've been in and around this stuff for 40 years, never seen anything like it.
Well, this is a digression and a side note, but for someone who likes to study the 19th century American politics, you had a series of really weak presidents and strong Congresses, legislative branches. And I wonder if we survive this, if that's not what we see at some point in the future, where the legislative branch kind of takes back, reasserts itself in the Ben, what are you going to say?
I'm just like, in other words, we just start doing what the Constitution says. I mean, that would be amazing. Right. Finally, hope for the future.
Article 1. Yeah.
I'll take checks first. We can have balances later. I'll take balances first. We'll take checks later. I don't need the whole thing right now. Yeah. Here's what my worry is on that. And again, this is from a little bit of history and a little bit of doing this stuff. There has been a movement of power toward the executive branch under Democrats and Republicans for the last 40 years. And here's one of my first rule of politics. People don't give up power willingly. So this idea that a Democrat will come in and say, okay, Congress, go back to having all your powers, it ain't going to happen. If you're president, you want as much power, you accumulate as much power as you can, because that's how you get things done, because Congress has become a body that can't get things done because of the makeup of it. It's just 2 extreme parties, nobody in the middle. So I don't know that you're going to see a reemergence of Congress. What has to happen and this is going to sound like I'm overstating it, but I'm not. But what has to happen is for the courts and the rule of law to get teeth again. And I don't know how that happens with the Supreme Court. Maybe a couple of them wake up and say, look what we did. We can't go on. Or it may just be over time, you have some turnover. But I just don't know that Congress comes back. But, I think the broader point was, and I don't know when this started, probably in the early 20th century, where the United States became what I like to call the adult in the room, no matter what the issue was. Wherever there was a crisis in the world, and it was, as a communications person, it was always hard because we were the ones that had to, sort of be the messengers of bad news. We would do stuff with Europe, and we'd figure out what to say, and there's some big problem, and we'd always say, and the French are going to come in and say, here's our solution, which was ridiculous. But they were able to go home and say, hey, the Americans didn't listen to us. We're not the adult in the room now. So there isn't a coherent way to solve global problems. And we are one financial crisis away from economic disaster. Because when it comes to financial, whether it was the peso crisis, the subprime loans, the whatever, the U.S. has stood in and not only put up the capital, but shown the leadership to rebuild and confidence in the markets and to keep our capitalism and capital markets working. We can't do that right now. We have a president who believes that what caused the Great Depression is good economic policy, like, closing the borders. So we can't do that. And we've just been lucky, and, while we all love to see the stock market going up and we all love to see, the value of our homes going up, if we hit a bubble and we have one of these, and it pops, I don't know who solves it. Europe can't, Asia can't, and eventually China will. And they will become the adult in the room unless we grow up.
Joe, I got 2 questions for you, and you take them one at a time. Feel free to just not take either of them. But we're lucky to have someone who was in the room where it happened, as people like to say these days. I've often wondered, you talked about Clinton's impeachment and his favorability actually goes up, right? Gore is running for president, and Gore is, historically speaking, we look back on that and say, Gore did not utilize Bill Clinton during the campaign as well as he could have. So my question, do you remember those conversations from the Clinton side? What was Clinton chomping at the bit to get in there? And what was that like? And I'll hold my second question till
later. It's a debate that's never going to resolve. When I left the White House, I started a business, and my two partners, the three of us, both worked for Al Gore. And one of them is just a nice guy and is neutral in this, but the other one, I have fought with him for 25 years over this. And I used the phrase one time on the impeachment day. Al Gore got up and said, Bill Clinton is the greatest president in U.S. history. And then I think he ran a campaign to disprove his own theory. And he took what Clinton did, took it personally, as he created this problem for me, and wasn't able to politically nuance both separating himself from a moral point of view, but attaching himself to all the progress that was made. And he obviously didn't have the charisma of Bill Clinton, but that's okay. People without charisma get elected. Joe Biden got elected. There's certainly others.
George H.W. Bush, yeah.
41. He wasn't, Mr. like, I want to go have a beer with. So it's certainly my view, my strongly held view, that if he had managed that political challenge better, he would have won. It is certainly the view of the Gore people that Clinton beat them, that George Bush didn't beat them, that Clinton beat them, that there was just this sense that Clinton had demeaned the office and all of that. The other piece of this, and you see this, we see politicians now as entertainers. And we want change. We want new people. Like, okay, we're tired of those guys. I've been watching Al Gore for 8 years. Tired of that. Who's this George Bush guy? I would want, let's take a look at him. So we don't make decisions. We certainly don't make decisions based on self-interest. Because if people made decisions based on self-interest, the South would be pure Democratic. Because most of the programs that the Democrats have pushed through, the vast majority of the benefits go to the South, to the poorest people. And they're solid Republicans. There's no sense to our democracy, but it's our democracy. But yes, Clinton was chomping at the bit. I can tell you that, and really wanted to help, but respected the vice president's wish that he not be very involved.
So my second question addresses the long tail of what Clinton did and how he survived it. So here you have a president in office. He commits he fails morally, he is impeached, and he's defiant in the face of that impeachment. Did Clinton soften the ground for Donald Trump, for the American people to accept a Donald Trump?
Yes and no. Is Clinton the first president who had this problem? Absolutely not.
Absolutely
Was
not.
he the first? Yeah. Was he the first president where the media had changed and there was no such thing as separating personal from public? Yes. Um, do I think that um, the ground was softened? A little bit. I just think that Trump is a black swan. I don't think I don't think anyone with that kind of personal record and background is going to get elected. Trump just has this, you know, um, snake oil that, people want to buy. And I don't know if there's anybody else like him. He certainly redefined politics in America, which if you 20 years ago, you asked me who would be the most significant person in the 21st century politically, and you said Donald Trump, and I knew Barack Obama was going to be there, I'd say you're crazy. I mean, we had a first black president like this, who did a bunch of stuff and was dynamic. Trump is much more significant as far as the structure uh, of our politics, which is crazy as far as I'm concerned. But I don't think he cares, nor does the body politic. So I wouldn't overstate the softening of the ground. The Clinton dynamic was largely driven by the fact that the Republicans overreached. I think the public then was willing to say things are going well. I really hate the stuff he did, but trying to run him out of office because of that when things are going so well, I don't agree with that. And Republicans just became like rabid dogs. And our strategy largely was just let them do it. And impeachment. I don't know if impeachment was ever going. I don't know if Democrats were at that point going to abandon Clinton. If you had asked me in January and February, there was a real chance Democrats were going to abandon. They got very close to it. And then Republicans gave them a lifeline by, overreaching. So the dividing line in this story was when the Starr report came out with all the sordid sex details, the public lost interest, but Republicans didn't. They thought they had him. And it's like, okay, they read it. We know what he did. It was terrible, but let's move on. And Republicans spent the next 6 months stopping everything we were doing and only focusing on that when they were over it. They had made a judgment of, okay, he did it, but I'm doing well. And that's why he, was able to not only survive, but thrive, in this time politically.
I've just as the last question here, some of the critiques I've read or, the histories I've read relate that scandal to the NATO bombing of Kosovo. And that this was hyped up. It was a relatively small operation, certainly consequential for the people on the ground there, but that this use of NATO and making this a big thing had to do with moving on and trying to distract. You're the guy, the press secretary. What would you say if somebody asked you that question, as I just did?
No, I mean, I'd say you're wrong, and I'd say that a closer look at history was if Bill Clinton was criticized for anything, and I think kind of rightly so, was not moving fast enough. There was genocide going on, in the former Yugoslavia, and we didn't do that much. And I think the world, led by the United States and Europe, decided Milosevic has to be stopped. And there was a very, it brings back a story that it was a very clear intention to make it NATO and not the U.S. going after, sort of imposing itself in Europe. And, my memory of it, which has nothing to do with the war, it has to do with communicating about the war, is the president was very clear with me, like, talk about NATO. Don't say the U.S. forces. These are NATO forces. And so we relied on the NATO communications department to do most of the heavy lifting. And I remember walking in, when you walk into the White House from where we park our cars, you walk right by the Situation Room. I go into the Situation Room every morning and I have a little intelligence packet that I take up to my office. And there's a guy in charge. And he looks at me, and I realize everybody's looking at me. And he goes, you might want to look at the transcript of the Clinton-Blair conversation last night. I said, what did they talk about? And he said, you. And I said, okay. And I guess Blair and Clinton had like a bitch session about how badly we were communicating. And Blair was bitching at his guy, Alistair Campbell, and Clinton at me. And I thought, okay, I don't, you're right, but you told me to use NATO. And I should have done this a week before, but I called the head of the NATO communications and I said, well, how big is your staff? And he said, I've got 2 people. And I was like, oh shit, talk about messing something up. So I got on the phone with Alistair, and we literally took 2 or 3 of the top communications people from every NATO country, and they descended on Brussels and turned it around. I mean, I sent 2 of my best people there, and they turned it around, and we fixed the problem that Blair and Clinton had identified. But it is, there are a lot of things happen when you work in the White House, and a lot of times your stomach turns over. But this was one of those moments when, the guy in charge of the Situation Room tells you, the leader of the United States and the Prime Minister of Great Britain had a conversation last night about you. First off, it's bad. They didn't get on the phone to talk about how great we were. And you're walking up to the office with a problem, and he's going to be in any minute to tell you his version of the problem. But, it was just one of those things where it was just a huge mistake on my part that we ultimately fixed.
Did Clinton have a temper?
Oh, God, yes. It was funny because it was his way of letting off steam, and he needed it. And one of the interesting parts of my job was anytime he went out in public, where he might get questions, I would prepare him, because his instincts for first answer were pretty much always wrong, because it was to defend himself and to push back. And he'd give some crazy answer, and I'd say, that's really good, but have you thought about this way of doing it? And one of the ways to do this was to provoke him. So he'd get his anger out in private. And I remember one time he was just eviscerating one of his economic advisors, who you could tell was really starting to take it personally. And I remember just butting in and saying, oh, Mr. President, I agree with it. And he just turned on me, because I thought, I can take this. I'm like, I have nothing to do with this policy. I haven't gotten yelled at in 3 or 4 days. But I will say this about Clinton, and I think it's important. He knew when he went too far, and he would always publicly apologize. He would always, in the next meeting, turn to whoever he had been unfair to and say, hey, I'm sorry about yesterday. I had a lot going on. And you don't see that a lot with politicians. And, there were times where I thought he was being unfair, but I didn't take it. I took it as a badge of I actually matter here. But if it did get personal, he would always apologize. Mm. And I never saw him not do that. And it just kind of goes to who he was.
Joe, this has been so great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Wonderful.
I'm glad to be here, and we could have gone all day, but thankfully you guys only have an hour.
That's right.
Thankfully you only have an hour, and you don't have to listen to me anymore.
This is great.
We hope you'll come back again.
I definitely will. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe, or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS Channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Ben Sawyer, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.